Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for attending this session about math in your ESL or ELL or MLL or whatever you are calling it, your class for English language learners. I am Elizabeth Bennett. I teach mostly intermediate and some advanced ESL learners at the Burnsville School for Adults. You also may know me as the distance learning coordinator for Literacy Minnesota, but that's really just my side gig. What I mostly do and what I love most is working with English learners. I have this picture of base 10 blocks because I never really thought I was going to be a math teacher. I took up through AP Calculus in high school. But honestly, today I can't even really tell you what calculus is. I'm not really sure. I never touched math in college, never thought I would have to take another math class. But then I decided I wanted to be an elementary teacher, and I had to take some math methods courses to get my elementary license. And I was really fortunate to discover in those courses that actually there are so many cool patterns in math. And when you can actually understand the concepts behind all those procedures and formulas, math really makes sense. And it's really, it's actually fun and interesting. So if you ever want to talk to me about base 10 blocks, they are like my favorite thing ever. Call me. Currently this year, I am teaching a morning ESL 4 class. So that's like low intermediate ESL. It's a HyFlex class, and it's, I would say it varies day to day, but usually about 60% of my students are in person and 40% online. I also have this kind of weird math and spelling class that I teach in the afternoons. It's kind of an elective class. It's all English language learners who chose to take that class kind of as an add-on to their regular English class. It's HyFlex, but the reality is it's almost 100% online. Most of my students attend online, and maybe I'll just have one or two in the classroom with me on some days. And of course, students are grouped in these classes based on their reading levels. Some of them might have a math score in SID. Usually if they have a score, it's like ABE 1 or 2, but students don't even always get assessed in math. So in this session, we'll take a few minutes to kind of set the scene and talk about why. Because I think a lot of ESL teachers, they don't really think that that's something that we should be covering in our classes. And then I'll tell you about kind of my approach for teaching math and numeracy with English language learners. I'll share some routines. Hopefully we'll have time to actually do at least 2 of them. And then at the end of the session, I have a lot of resources that I will share with you, and hopefully you'll share out some of the things that you have learned or have been thinking about. This will be pretty informal, so I do have the chat open. I'll try to keep my eye on it. If you have a question, just write in the chat, or you can do the raise hand thing in Zoom. So why math in ELL classes? I know not all teachers feel this way, but I think kind of a common concern or objection is that really we just need to be teaching English first. Like, my learners have so many needs with English language. Let's just handle that first, and then they can take a math class later. So I'm wondering, is this a question you yourself have asked? Or is this something you have heard a colleague say? And what do you think? What's your opinion on this question? You can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself. I'm in Moorhead, and I was gonna say that I think, we have kind of a small school, but maybe attitudes are changing because my ELL colleagues actually seem to recognize that math is a life skill. And especially as they start doing, like going through CCRS, it's stuff we're already doing actually, and so what I hear from my colleagues is that it's a life skill and it is just part of the class.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're fortunate in Minnesota. We have had a lot of really great PD opportunities around math and trying to make math accessible for all learners. And I see some comments in the chat about, yeah, word problems. There is a ton of language involved in learning math. So it makes sense that in a language class, we would want to provide some support. Someone else said in the chat, I think it's very relevant, but sometimes I don't have a lot of buy-in from students about the importance of learning math. Yes, I've encountered that as well. Teresa says, as a mostly GED teacher, it would be helpful if the transition, if the transition wasn't so abrupt. Students came in with some exposure already to math, so they wouldn't be starting at ground zero when they need to get their GED. Yes, I definitely agree. Yeah, and Jean says in the chat, there are many math questions in the CASAS tests, even if it's not the CASAS math test, even in the reading test, you have to read things like calendars, ads, things having to do with purchasing, making financial decisions. Yeah, Rebecca says they deal with math every day, buying things, paying bills, and it's important to know what you're doing. Yes, okay. Thank you. So this isn't a hard sell. I was worried it might be a little difficult, but we all seem to, or almost all seem to be kind of on the same page that yes, this is important. And the Minnesota Numeracy Instruction Advisory Team has put out this statement a few years ago about how we really do need to be providing access to numeracy instruction at every level, every literacy level, every language level of our classes, because it does affect people's lives. Even just another comment in the chat, just reading time off a clock. Like there's so many number skills involved with that. So thank you so much for your comments. I think another common objection or sticking point, and someone pointed this out in the chat too, is that teachers themselves feel like I'm just not a math person. And yeah, that can be a big challenge as ESL teachers. Maybe we don't have a background in math instruction. And so it can feel really intimidating. I would like to challenge that a little bit and just encourage you to think that really everyone can be a math person. Do math, any kind of math, and be a person. You are therefore a math person. There are some great resources that I've linked here in the slides, and they'll also be in your handout at the end of the session. There are some really nice short videos that you can show to your students related to like having anxiety around math, feeling like you have to do things really quickly, get the right answer immediately all the time. If you don't do that, you're just bad at math, but really the opposite is true. You learn more by making mistakes and things not working the first time, and then you go back and approach it differently. There's actually a lot of brain science to support this. From that same organization, there is a free online course on how to learn math. It's directed towards students, and they do have another one directed towards teachers. That one, unfortunately, is not free, but I learned a lot just from taking the student course. And then this was a cute little blog post that you can check out later. So just, I think, I put in my session description, wrong answers are welcome. And I really believe that. And I talk about that a lot with my students. I actually thank them when they show their work and it's wrong. I appreciate that because they're probably not the only person in the class who had that way of thinking about the problem. And we can all learn from looking at their work and thinking about other methods. I have actually found that my adult learners have a lot of strengths working in math, even in an ESL class. In general, my students seem pretty motivated to learn math. My afternoon class, it was supposed to be equally math and spelling, but it has turned into almost, we mostly just do math because the students really are interested and really want to learn math. Some of them are working towards their GED. Some of them are working toward their paraprofessional certificate. So they have that motivation, that real need to learn math. But even if they don't have those goals, everybody seems to recognize that, this is valuable in so many everyday contexts. Also, I think we talk about math trauma for American students who have been through the American school system. A lot of us probably have some math trauma. And ELs, I think, since they come from other educational systems, they might not have that same baggage. I tried to do some activities at the beginning of the year with my math class about, establishing a math mindset and what we can do to be less anxious about math. And somebody just said to me, I'm really not that anxious about math. I just want to learn math. Can we start the math now? So they might not have the same baggage that you do coming into it. They do have experience in other educational systems often, so that can lead to some really rich conversations about different ways of approaching different math concepts. And of course, we're working with adults, so they have so many fabulous life experiences that help them understand math. I really loved this quote. It was shared at our Fall Math Institute from Lisa Jilk. Everyone is, in fact, mathematically smart as a result of living in the world. And this was from an article about, I think, middle school students. And I think, wow, that just applies even that much more to adults. And something I tell my students a lot is that you already know this from your life. You may not have expressed it in, the fancy function notation or fractions or whatever fancy math language that we're learning, but you already have conceptual understanding from everything you have done in your life up to now. So now, some secrets. And these are not actually secrets, okay? I don't really have any secrets. I really think math content is just another context for teaching language. So, I mean, just like we think about, we need to teach the language of financial literacy, we need to teach the language of health, we need to teach the language of filling out documents and all these life skills. Math is just another context where we can teach vocabulary and grammar. I do provide extra support with math-specific vocabulary and conventions. So how we use parentheses in math, that's a convention. You can't just figure it out on your own. Somebody has to tell you that that's what the meaning of that is. But mostly in my classes, we just do math and then we talk about our thinking. And I provide additional language support as needed. I'll show you a few examples of what that looks like. So here we were working on fractions, and I do a lot of these matching activities. So students will try to match a term and then a definition or an example. And here, with the 1/8 is less than 1/3, we talked about how to compare fractions and what that symbol means. Again, there's another math convention, you wouldn't really know what that means unless somebody just taught it to you. So we have to be explicit about certain things that are specific to math. But then that example of like, it looks kind of weird to say that something with an 8 is less than something with a 3, because normally we think 8 is more than 3. But again, you already understand this from your life. If you have a loaf of bread or a cake or whatever, and you cut it into 3 equal pieces, obviously those pieces are going to be bigger than if you cut it into 8 equal pieces to share it with 8 people. This is not really a math example. This was from my morning class, just from like a story we were reading. But I think this is something you could definitely do with math vocabulary. This is just a variation on like the Freyer model or the quadrant chart from the STAR training. And I've just added the translation bit to this graphic organizer, because I think, again, it's really important to recognize that our adult learners do have experience with this. And if they want to translate that word and connect it to what they have already learned in another class or setting, that is really powerful. It's validating their experience and it's helping them learn the term that much better. I'm sorry, I see a question in the chat. Elizabeth, do you spend a lot of extra time finding ways to implement math, or do you have a curriculum that you follow? That is an excellent question. I have no curriculum, no curriculum at all. I try to I ask my students what they want to learn, and then we work on that. I guess I'm fortunate in that way. I have the flexibility. It's not a GED or pre-GED class, so I don't have a lot of standards that I'm required to cover. Another example, here's a word problem, and we are using this procedure that's from there's a collection of 8 math language routines. And math language routine 6 talks about doing 3 reads of a word problem, and not even focusing on the question at the end, but just going through it multiple times to be sure that you are actually understanding what is happening. Yes, that is a lot of candy. So really focusing on the language first before even worrying about the numbers. Something else we do in my classes is we solve problems and then we talk about our different solutions, and we try to make sure that we are understanding other people's strategies. So this is something called a dot talk, which I'll show you a little bit more later. But basically, you just look at a picture of dots, very not intimidating, right? Anyone can count dots, but you try to look at it and see if you can tell like how many dots are in the picture without actually counting individually. So someone saw 2 groups of 3 plus that one in the middle to make 7. Another person saw 3 groups of 2 plus that one in the middle to make 7. And so we talk about how those are all valid, and all of us are learning from each other when we share our different solution strategies. Something else is, yeah, I do try to ask learners what is important to them in math. I have found that that really does help with the buy-in. Becky, yeah, so there's math language routines. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about them in this presentation, but I have linked some resources in the handout that I'll give you at the end. You might be surprised. I certainly have been. I gave my students a survey asking what they wanted to learn in math, my morning class, my ESL class. And one student actually pulled me over and took out her wallet and showed me these coins and just said, "These coins, I have no idea what they are. Can we please work on counting coins?" And so we did. But I guess, I mean, that was just something I had assumed. It's intermediate level 4. I thought, you know, people know coins already. We don't need to spend time on this, but that student really wanted to. I gave my class, this was just a simple Google Forms survey so they could check the boxes for everything that they wanted to work on, anything that was interesting to them. I did give them the option. I don't want to learn math in this class. And I was happy only 5 out of 22 people chose that one. And I think the timing of the survey had a little bit to do with that. We had just done a math activity that I had not asked people if they were interested in. We were working on percents because it was related to our health unit reading nutrition labels. But I just decided, okay, we should work on percents. And it was kind of a frustrating activity. Like I need a do-over. So I think that was some of why why 5 people said they didn't want to learn math at all. But really the majority of people did want to learn math, and I learned that most of them wanted to really just practice saying numbers in English. Again, that was something I had assumed, like, oh, my students already know this at level 4, but they really wanted to work on that. Yes, everyone has do-overs. Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah. So this is another example. We were working on improper fractions and mixed numbers, and a student just wanted to know, could we draw a picture of 1 3/2, and what would that look like? And so it took some time, but I said, sure, we can do that. And then we talked about, this term equivalent, and again, numerator and denominator, and all these good math words, putting them into a meaningful context that was meaningful for those particular students. And then my third really big thing is that you have to build a caring community in your class. This should be obvious, and I think most teachers do a good job of this already, but many people have a lot of anxiety or even trauma around math, and learners have to feel safe enough to be able to share their thinking, to be able to ask questions, and to be able to learn from mistakes or wrong answers. Some of my class expectations that I share with students when new students join the class. Of course, everyone is welcome and important. Also, it's totally normal when you are learning a new language and when you are learning math, when you're learning anything new, you're going to get confused sometimes. It's going to be hard sometimes. You're not going to get it immediately. So ask for help. Ask me. Ask your classmates. Everyone in our class is really smart and really nice, and you can ask each other for help. And then my school has an attendance policy. And I think if students are gone from the class for a certain period of time, technically I'm supposed to take them off my roster. I don't really do that because I just, I appreciate that many of my learners have very complicated lives, and I just want them to come back to class. My class, I just tell them class is always open. I know sometimes you have reasons you have to leave and you can't come to class. It's okay. Just come back when you can. I will always be happy to see you. And then also, I try to be, like I said before, very explicit about, like, wrong answers are helpful. Wrong answers help us learn. I took this example of student work. We were trying to sequence numbers, fractions on a number line. And of course, you can see none of the fractions are really correctly placed. But we looked at, what is correct? What did this student do well? Because they are showing some understanding. They've got 0 and 1. They've got all the fractions in between 0 and 1. So that's correct. And it makes sense they were using what they already knew about whole numbers to put the fractions in order 2, 3, 4, 5. So we talked about that, and I said this is a very common thing that students do, so thank you to the person who did this because you're really helping us learn. Any other questions or comments that I may have missed, or that you want to just pop in now? All right, so we'll go on, feel free to keep writing in the chat. Oh, thank you, Megan. Where do you get your ideas for teaching, like reading the problem 3 times and the dot talk? Yeah, so I have been fortunate to be able to participate in a lot of math and numeracy professional development over the past few years. And I'm sharing a lot of those resources in a handout at the end of the session. It's kind of just a big mess of stuff I've accumulated over the years, honestly. I really like the book Making Number Talks Matter. That was where I learned about this idea of doing a dot talk. And another book I like is by Pamela Weber Harris, and that has some nice worksheets you can copy, and you'll see an example of that in a minute. But really, there's so much stuff online that is free, and I've linked a ton of those resources, so you don't have to buy a book or pay any money to get started. So I'll share with you 3 routines. I think we probably won't have time. Oh, yes, making number talks matter. And I think I did not put that on the handout, but it's a Google Doc, so I can add it later. We won't have time to actually do all these routines, but I'll talk through them with you at least. And this one we will do. This is a 4 corners game. And I said I was going to give you routines that could be used in any teaching modality. So this one admittedly is easier in person, but we are going to do it online. We're going to try it online. In a second, Amber's going to put a Menti link in the chat. So you'll click the link and respond, and that'll be like how you go to your corner. You could, depending on your online teaching setup, you could use the poll function within Google Meet or Zoom. You could use another tool like Desmos. You could use Jamboard, where students write their name on a sticky note and put it in a corner of the Jamboard. Lower tech options, students can just type a number in the chat, or even write on a whiteboard or a piece of paper and hold it up to their camera. So it is possible even if you're not in person. So let's go ahead and try this. We'll drop that link in the chat. And then you'll just respond to this first question, and I'll try to make sure my screen sharing. So can everyone see both my slides? Yes, okay, and the Menti, great. So we've got some responses coming in. All right, so you can keep responding. But I'll just go to my next slide. So here are some language things you can do once your students have either walked to their corner of the room or submitted their response electronically. You can just ask students to talk about what they notice and what they wonder. This is a really great low stress math routine, and you can use it for something like this. You can use it for an algebra equation, you can use it for a graph, you can use it for anything. And even if I don't understand anything about the problem, I can notice things. I can still notice. I see blue dots, I see circles. I see the word math. Everyone can notice, and everyone can ask questions. Everyone can wonder. Yeah, sorry, Leah, you just pick the one that feels best. Yeah, you do only get one choice in this activity. And then students can also ask, why are there so many people in the ESL group? How many people are in the one room schoolhouse group? I wonder why there's only one person who teaches a math for ELL students class. They can, it's very open, anyone can answer. I have a second question for you now. All right, so this is about your current teaching format, either in person, online, hybrid or HyFlex or other. And again, just choose the one answer that you feel best applies. So I like Menti because it gives you this option of you can do the dots, you can do a bar graph. This isn't like a really fancy mathy bar graph, but maybe that's better. There's no, there's no y-axis, there's no scale, but maybe this is great for just an introduction to reading graphs. And if, depending on the level and your context, you can also get into more, some more mathy questions and answers. Definitely how many, which group has the greatest or least. If you're doing some data analysis, graph reading, what are the top 2 categories? Which are the bottom 2 categories? If you want to start comparing numbers, how many more people teach in person than online? So there's a lot of possibilities with this. And again, it's very, very low stress. Anyone can contribute, even if they feel like they don't have a lot of prior math knowledge. All right, so I'll make my slides big again. And we'll go into this second routine. This is called a counting circle. And again, this, alas, is easier in person, but it is possible in online or HyFlex. I have done this in my HyFlex class and it's worked pretty well. If I had an entire class online and it were a large class, I might divide people into breakout groups. And then for the HyFlex option, I just, everyone stands in a circle who is in the classroom, but then my computer and my OWL camera have, like a spot in the circle. And then we go around the circle. And then when we get to the computer, I have the students, the online students' names displayed. So it'll be, Juliana is the last person in the classroom. So she says her number, and then Sama online, and then Glody online, and then we continue with Norma in the classroom, and we just continue around the circle. There is an example Jamboard in the handout that you can look at more later. I like to start this activity by talking about a hundreds chart, since it's something really commonly used in elementary math. So if my students are parents, they may have seen this, or their kid might come home with some homework with a hundreds chart. And then I prefer, I modified it because it kind of bothers me that they don't usually include 0. I think 0 is a really important number to be aware of and to practice saying. So I have added 0 to my chart. And we're going to try this quickly. Unfortunately, this will not be very equitable. I'm just going to take the first 5 people who type their name in the chat or who raise their hand. So if you would like to be brave and volunteer, go ahead, let me know, and I'll put your name on the Jamboard. Thank you, Janice. No one else? Oh, okay, great. Okay, thank you, Liddy. Oops, sorry. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Karen. Okay. So I will start with a number, and then we'll just go in order. And then after Karen, it'll come back up to me. So you'll have to unmute yourself to say your number. And we'll make it easy. We will start at 0. And we're going to count up to 100 by 5s. Okay, so the first number is 0.
5,
10,
15,
20, 25,
30,
35,
40,
45,
50, 55,
60,
65.
70.
75.
Is it Jessica?
80.
Thank you.
85.
90.
95.
100.
100. Liddy's the winner. Thank you. So there are a ton of things you can do with this activity. Of course, probably the very first time you do it, you would start at 0 and just count up by ones. You can also count down by ones, count backwards. You can count up or down by a different number, by tens, hundreds, thousands. Of course, you can go beyond 100 if you want to work with larger numbers. You can count down from 0, practice saying the word negative and get comfortable with, how negative numbers work. You could count up or down by an amount that is less than a whole number. So count up by 1/2. You could also count dollars, count cents, count hours, count minutes. So in my class, for that student who wanted to work on money, we talked about quarters, and then we practiced counting up by increments of 25 cents. So many possibilities. You can make it as easy or as difficult as you want. You might want to keep some sort of a record of the numbers that the students are saying, and then you can refer back to that later and talk about the patterns that people notice. And then here are some possible sentence frames I thought of for these language functions of disagreeing politely with someone. Liddy, can you check your answer? Or I'm not sure that's next in the pattern. I think it's 35 because, and then explaining your thinking and describing patterns. All right, the third routine, we will not have time to actually do this, but I'll just show it to you quickly. This is the dot or the number talk, or if you have a class where you're doing some more advanced math work, maybe you want to do more like a warm-up problem or a problem of the day. So I do this online and it works great. I have all my students go to a shared Jamboard. Everyone has their own frame in the Jamboard. I just make copies of the same frames. Everybody has the same problem. They put their name on the frame, or I put their name on it for them. And then everybody works. We have everybody's work together all in one place so we can look at all the different solutions. And then we talk about different ways of solving the problem. So it works great online. You could use Jamboard, you could use Desmos, you could use other platforms. A less techie solution, your students could write on a whiteboard or a piece of paper and hold it up to their camera if they need to. If you have in-person students, you can still have everyone use Jamboard or whatever online platform, as long as you have devices and adequate Wi-Fi. The in-person, if it's a HyFlex class, you can have the online students working on the Jamboard, and then in-person students can work on paper or on whiteboards. And you could, if you are tech savvy yourself, you could try to take photos of the in-person students' work and then add those photos to the Jamboard or the online platform. So I've done this just with dot talks. And we, of course, talk about this vocabulary of like equations and the equal sign and different math operations, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and practice that language. This is an example of that, something from the Pamela Weber Harris book. So a little more abstract, this is definitely leveling up. This was the activity I did that one day when I gave the survey, and some students said, no more math. So I tried to support them by providing a context for the problem. And we, then we had some discussion about, how can you use what you already know about, if you can find 10% How can you use that to find 1% and then 90% and then 91%? And there is a template for this Jamboard on the handout that you'll get. And then some possible sentence frames for this activity. You know, obviously you're going to be explaining your thinking process, talking about steps in a procedure, and even you can get into like, how do you make an argument and support an argument? All right, so there are a ton of resources. Amber's going to drop that link in the chat, and it is also in the folder for this session. So everyone can get that handout. And then for the final reflection, not really the final reflection, but we have 3 minutes left. So take a moment to write to yourself. If you want to write in the chat and share with all of us, that's fantastic. I would love to hear what you're thinking. But also I think it's important to keep notes just for yourself. So on your own piece of paper or your Google Doc or whatever, just take a moment and write down one thing you want to remember or think about, one thing you're going to try to do ASAP, and then one thing you would like to try or reflect on in the longer term. Thank you. Janice says she's gonna think about different ways to use the number chart, that hundreds chart. Megan says, once again, we see how powerful routines are in any subject. Ah, Mike, yes. Borrowing and carrying, yes. Personally, I have strong feelings about, I would not even use those words. And I would recommend that Number Talks, Making Number Talks Matter book for some ways to talk about the whole concept. Yeah, thanks, Liddy. I appreciate the honesty about feeling a little stuck about where to start. But yeah, there's so much. And yeah, Liddy says, I think I'll start with a survey of what students want. Thank you. Susan says, wrong answers welcome. Names on individual Jamboard frames will help solve the confusion. Sometimes, yeah, usually that works. It's not foolproof. And then, yeah, templates or sentence frames to explain your thinking. Jessica says, I want to use Menti. Yes, believe it or not, this was my first time using Menti today, and it went smoothly. It's pretty easy to use. Someone, Cindy wants to try dot talks. Karen's going to try asking what her students want to learn. Simple math to start, says Julio. Thank you so much, everyone. So let me make sure that link was put in the chat. Let me find it here. There's that link to the handout. Sorry about that. It is also in the session folder.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This was great.
You're so welcome.
There are so many comments coming in about how great it was and how practical it was. So thank you so much. And I will drop the links to the flyers, the 2 copies of the flyer again. So next up is the networking coffee breaks starting at 1:15. So we hope to see you at one of those. Thank you so much.